Hi there, Dan Scott here. I'm going to walk you through a simple approach that I use to start many of my landscape paintings, particularly complex ones where there's a lot of noise and information to convey. Broadly speaking, it involves mapping out the subject with dark and simple shapes, then, with the paint still wet, going over the top with the highlights and light midtones. It's an efficient way to start because you can quickly cover the surface without needing to worry about all the tiny details. And once you finally add in the light colours, it transforms the simple shapes into realistic objects and things. The dark green shape becomes trees and plants, the dark blue shape becomes water and rocks. And because all this was done wet on wet, provided you're using oils, you can paint in a way that the light and dark areas gently melt into each other. I'll use this recent painting to demonstrate. It's titled Kedron Sunflowers. I started by staining the surface with transparent oxide brown to give me a dark foundation to work with. I then do a rough sketch of the composition. Nothing detailed, I'm basically just mapping out the major shapes. Then I go and start filling in these shapes with colour. I start around the bottom and mostly use ultramarine blue and viridian green, with lots of odorless solvent to thin the paint and make it more fluid. The idea is to use colours that broadly represent the subject. It's also important to go slightly dark with the colours. We will have a chance to add lighter colours later on. For now, we just want a strong dark foundation to work with. And ignore any tiny details. Simplify it all into big simple shapes and colours. All the flickering highlights and colours and flowers don't matter at the moment. Now that doesn't mean the shapes need to be flat and static. There can be some colour variance, but it should represent big picture aspects of the subject. With my painting, notice the subtle shifts in colour with the different blues and greens, while staying true to the big simple shapes. I move on to the light parts of the grass and plants. I still go fairly dark with the colours, but I am trying to pay attention to the value relationships that I can see in the subject. That is, I'm making sure the light areas are light in relation to the dark areas. The colours get darker again for the trees in the background. As you can see, once you take out the highlights and the light midtones, it's a fairly dark subject. For the sky, I use a mix of cobalt blue and titanium white. I stay fairly true to its actual value here. That is, I don't make the sky darker like I have been doing with the other areas. That's because there isn't much going on with the sky, so I can paint in the colour now and leave it for the rest of the painting if I get the colour right. I'll also be able to use the sky as a reference point for my values going forward. I'm still using thin paint with lots of solvent here. Notice how this allows some of the stained surface to show through. This takes a bit of the edge off the colour. Working wet on wet also allows me to create these nice soft edges between sky and land. What I have now is a simple foundation for the painting, with the colours leaning towards the dark side. Now I can go over the top with the lighter colours, and I can use these lighter colours to transform and bring the dark shapes to life. I start with the water. I gently suggest the light blue reflections on the water's surface using the same colour that I mixed for the sky. The paint is still wet, so the more I work the colour into the surface, the more the colours mix. This allows me to create a subtle colour gradation from light around the top to dark around the bottom. Then I move on to the plants and flowers in the foreground. This is the focal point of the painting, so this is where I need to spend most of my time and attention. I use a medium-sized flat brush to suggest strands of grass shooting up from the ground. As I make each stroke, I need to account for the colours mixing on the surface. The surface here is mostly dark blue, so this will make the colours cooler the more they mix. This is where a basic understanding of colour mixing comes in handy. I know that if I make strokes of pure yellow on the blue surface, the colours will blend towards green. And if I make strokes of green on the blue surface, the colours will blend towards a cooler, bluer green. I can avoid the colours blending somewhat by loading the brush full of paint and then gently dragging it across the surface. This will create a distinct and unblended stroke. You can see I'm doing this here with these bursts of yellow. I want these colours to be warm and bright, so I don't want them to mix with the blue on the surface. I then scumble some of this light colour over the grass in the back. To do this, I only use a small amount of paint on the brush, and then I gently drag it over the surface, avoiding much blending. The idea is to have these light colours act as flickering highlights, with some of the darker colours still showing through. For the background trees, I keep it simple and focus more so on the general light and dark shapes. I don't want to draw too much attention to the background. I want it to fall back in terms of attention so that the foreground can really stand out. I then suggest some more of the plants and leaves and flowers in the foreground. I need to be careful here not to overdo it with the light colours, otherwise I may compromise the dark shapes and the fundamental structure of the painting. Less is more here, especially when it comes to the strongest highlights and any bursts of saturated colour. Finally, I roughly map out the sunflowers using a mix of cadmium yellow and a touch of raw umber to bring it down a notch in terms of saturation. I'm still keeping things simple and being careful not to get lost in the tiny details too soon. I need to be completely satisfied with the big picture shapes and colours before I move on to the tiny details. I would say that's about it for the start of this painting. All up, this was only a bit over 45 minutes of painting time, and the subject is already starting to come to life. It's amazing how a few highlights here and there can really transform simple shapes into plants, flowers, grass, and water. From here, I continue to refine what's on the surface and make sure all the parts work together. But I won't cover that today. I just wanted to touch on the start of this painting, as it's quite an effective approach for subjects like this. Here's how the painting turned out. I'll also publish a time-lapse when I get a chance, so you can see the rest of the painting process. Thanks for watching. If you found this helpful, please give the video a like and follow the channel. Happy painting, and I'll see you in the next one.